Hello, my name is Jake Evelson. I'm doing a presentation for the Accounting Ethics course at Southern Utah University. This is Dr. Christensen's class. Um, so I am giving a presentation on ethics in management. And so let's begin. All right. Just a quick overview of what we're going to go over. We are going to first go over management's role in ethics and what they do inside a company and why ethics are so important with what manager's job is. And then we're going to go over the COSO framework. We're mainly going to look at the control environment and tone at the top. I think that's the best way to see management's impact, especially with ethics. And after that, we're going to go over a poor management ethics example, and we're going to go over two ethics examples that I think are really good, and then we're going to have a conclusion. So to get started with management's role, we know that throughout time, management has really evolved with inside business. So initially, management job was really to restrict employees, and they had an 8 to 5 job, and they were supposed to put out X amount of units an hour, and there needed to be kind of oversight over this, just because there were so many employees. But as we have moved away from the industrial age and we have emerged into the really complex relationships we have now, the time of just watching over employees and making sure they're on task isn't necessarily what we need. We have a lot more education in the workforce these days, and what we really need is managers who can help with goals. Managers who want to use the best use for all of the company's resources for the long term. We don't want them just aiming at those short-term profits to make them look good, but we want them really to focus on goals and help other people achieve the overarching goals of the company. So as we go into management's role, Milton Friedman gave a really bold statement on this. He says that the management's role is to increase the business's profits. And he says this really blatantly, but he also mentions in his articles from 1970 that there is basic laws and customs that are embodied by society, and that we also need to follow them. I think he understands that because businesses and employees are part of the social structure that makes up the world, they need to do more than just focus solely on profits. I think it's part of a puzzle that they have to put together, and if they are just focused on ethics and not profits, that's not what the business needs. But if they focus solely on profits, that's also not good for the business. So they need them both to move forward. So the real goal of the company is, again, and management's goal is to help the company and everyone inside the company to achieve goals that uses the company's resources for its best use over a long-term period. So management, especially in public companies, it's required, but that they incorporate the COSO framework inside the business. And so the COSO framework is it was initially introduced in 1992, and it's how companies can gauge their internal control and really see how management's impact should be and what it should be accomplishing. So there's 5 areas from the original COSO framework that we're going to go over. There's more now in 2016, but we're going to focus on these, and we're especially going to focus on the first one, which is the control environment. And along with the control environment, there's also risk assessment, there's control activities, there's information and communication, and there's monitoring activities. But the control environment's really, I think, how you will be able to evaluate if management is acting ethically. They can, put all these controls in place and things like that, but it's really up to their attitudes and their decisions and everything they do every day that makes up the control environment. And I think control environment is best summed up by the tone at the top. And so as we can see in this picture, it really does just everything falls behind leadership, and the people throughout the company are going to act in accordance with how these top managers and even lower level managers act. So acting ethically from the very beginning and from the top down is how we want it to be done, especially in accounting. We know that accountants have a lot of subjective items that they work on, and that ethics is really everything that they stand for. And so a quote by the AICPA is, um, the management's conduct should be a source of guidance on daily behavior and set the minimum standards for that behavior. And so I think it's interesting they say that management should set the minimum expectations. So when management makes a choice, it should be ethical, and it should be one that is going to be followed through no matter what. And they need to enforce that and back that up. That's part of the tone at the top, that we're going to act ethically, and if you don't, there's going to be repercussions for it. So um, this needs to be throughout the entire company and not just at the top. And our example of someone who suffered from a poor tone at the top was Betty Benson. Now, I know Betty Benson was an accounting manager at WorldCom, and she was approached by some superiors and colleagues, and she was asked to do some fraud. And she initially rejected the idea and was kind of upset that they would even do this. And so she left that day, and she didn't commit any fraud. She went home, and I think this is where the fraud triangle really came in to play here, and we can see it very clearly. So Betty, she was presented with an opportunity for fraud, but initially she had pressure to do it, but she realized, hey, this isn't what I want. You know, I'm an accountant. I stand on my ethics, and that's part of who I am. But as the pressures increased and increased from her coworkers, she also thought, you know, what if I lose my job over this? And she was the sole breadwinner at her home. So there was a lot of pressure for her to keep bringing in money so she could feed her family. And eventually the rationalization crept in as, you know, they said, you know, it's just this one time, it's just an error that we're going to fix later, it's, you know, it's just going to be a wash. And she eventually committed the fraud, which we know turned out very bad. So another example of someone who I think set a good tone at the top. Now, Cynthia Cooper was the whistleblower for WorldCom, and we know that she uncovered a lot of really odd things, and she found the fraud scheme, and she presented it to the CEO, but the CEO was in on it, so he didn't really care. But what I think is interesting is that Cynthia Cooper was in the same control environment as Betty Benson, but Cynthia stepped up, and she had to watch her back, and she received a lot of backlash for the things she was doing, trying to understand what was going on. But in the end, she came through, and she's been rewarded for it, and she's changed, how students are now taught in business school and how management is perceived and their expectations. So I think Cynthia did a great job, even with a poor tone at the top. And as we move on, I really like Mary T. Barra. She is the current CEO of GM and has been since 2014. And Mary has really set a great tone at the top, I believe. She has faced a lot of adversity in her short time as CEO, but she's been with GM from the very beginning of her career. And she started as an electrical engineer, made it up to plant manager, held other vice president and president positions, and eventually became the CEO. And with that, she has a lot of weight to carry, especially as GM was in bankruptcy at the time, and working with the government and legislature to try and figure out how the company was going to restructure and move forward. But Mary, there's just some incredible stories about how she sets a great tone. It's said that Mary has an iron fist that's clothed in a velvet glove. And so I think that's a great way to ensure that the control environment is working properly. That Mary sets the expectation that we're going to do what is right, and we're going to always do it right. And if we don't, there's some consequences to it. And one quote from Mary, and working with the government, I thought that was a good example of her setting a proper tone. She says, "We told the world we had a problem that needed to be fixed. We did so because whatever mistakes we made in the past, we will not shirk from our responsibilities now and in the future." And I think we see Mary enforcing that with all the recalls and things like that that GM has now done voluntarily and trying to reshape their image in society. Mary is really setting a great job for ethics and management. So as we move on to our conclusion, managers really are in a tight spot because they're being pulled by society for truth and openness and fairness and equity, but they're also being pulled by owners, the people who are writing their paychecks saying we need to act at this bottom line. So there are opposing forces, but we know that management is responsible for both. But there needs to be both. There can't be just one, or they're going to fall short as a manager. And I think this is incredibly important in the accounting aspect. So in accounting, our sole responsibility ultimately lies with the public. We are there to verify and to essentially sell trust that what companies and what managers are telling them are true. And so with that, there was an example that I had when I was doing my undergrad at Utah State. And a partner from a Big Four company came who was a previous Utah State student. He was an alum. And he was talking to us. And at first he wrote on the board, remember those T accounts? And he had this big T. And after that, he talked some more. And then he said, what do accountants sell? What are we really in business of doing? And after the T, the big T account, he wrote R-U-S-T. And at first, the whole class thought he spelled rust, but he was actually spelling trust. And it stayed with me ever since then, because all accountants really have are their ethics, and without them, they're nothing. So ethics are so profound and so necessary in accounting, and especially management accounting. And so I think that with that, it goes without being said that accountants need to abide by not only the basic rules, not only the laws, not only GAAP, but they need to go above and beyond that. They need to ensure that they're fulfilling their role to society and their role to management and shareholders. Because without that, they won't be doing their true duty as accountants. So thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.